Hey, good afternoon. Carl Rominger here, and I'm joined by a very special guest, Armstrong Williams. Armstrong, do I have you?
We have each other.
Thank you for coming on the show. It's an honor to have you, first of all. And
an honor?
It's an honor to have you here.
On this stormy day with Irene, what better way to spend your time?
And let me ask you this question. You're obviously very familiar with radio, and I think a lot of our listeners know you because we have a fairly conservative audience here on WHP 580. And I know it's an audience that you've spoken to many times over the years in the sense that they follow conservative commentators. But for people who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
I'm not the last person. I'm not good at talking about myself. They'll discover us through the interview.
Okay.
I'm terrible about talking about myself. I know some people love it. I just don't.
Well, I'll tell them a little bit.
Thank you.
You came to... And of course, I read a little bit about you online and also learned a lot more about you in reading your new book, Reawakening Virtues.
Well, thank you for reading the book.
I read the whole book. I read it on my iPad, which is the greatest invention, I think, in the history of the world, that I could just download it and read it and not have to wait for it to come in the mail. But what I wanted to say, I guess, about your background is, you worked in the Reagan administration. You tell a great story in the book about that phone call you got. And how you got involved with that, and with Martin Luther King celebration, and your history coming from the South and from a farm family, right?
Yes.
So you know the meaning of work and hard work.
I can tell you a thing or two about it.
Well, I had a friend that was hired one time for a job, and he was told later the only reason he got the job was because he'd worked on a dairy farm as a kid, and the people who hired him said they knew what hard work was, and they really didn't care beyond that what the rest of his resume had to say. So I think it tells us something. Now, let me ask you about your book. What made you write this book, Reawakening Virtues?
That's a very interesting question. What made me? Gosh, I wanted to write this book. For a long time. Okay. I wanted to write something. I've read all the classics, and I love St. Augustine's Confessions. Then I also love C.S. Lewis, and I've read a lot of Sophocles and Socrates, and I think about what the Greeks have contributed to our society, the impact that it's had on the written word, on ethics, and all those important concepts. And, when you think about your life, I went through No Child Left Behind in the Bush administration, where we disclosed that we were being paid by the Department of Education on television and radio, but we did not disclose it when I was writing about it for my syndicated column at the time with Tribune Syndicate.
And you mentioned this in the book. Very interesting. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this book even before that, that I wanted to write something because, it's not your wealth or materialism that leaves a legacy for generations to come. I think the written word is so important. And for me, I've never lost my faith in God, nor has it ever been weakened, because I almost drowned as a teenager, and it was so miraculous how I was saved in that river of water that it left an indelible print of faith, where my faith has never been shaken. But I've always wanted to leave behind some kind of legacy. I wanted to write something about reawakening virtues. And so, awakening virtues, what it does, it poses a sort of a bold and imaginative challenge to the prevailing wisdom concerning the progress and direction of Western society and ultimately the entire civilization. It's sort of a manifesto for social progress. It assertively and sort of provocatively champions a resurgence of fundamental virtues, the kind of things that you talked about in introducing me, the hard work, and I would add to that the virtues of faith and truth, thrift and compassion, which are embodied in the ethos of American society and those men that I just mentioned, that I love their works, and by extension, Western civilization. So in the tradition of Thomas Paine's common sense. Awakening Virtue, for me, is a catalyst for fresh thinking about the challenges of modern American society. See, in today's world, especially in America, the average person finds that they have lost, they're just lost in a world barely recognizable as the place of our founding fathers. Our founding fathers would not even recognize this place today if we thought about our forefathers who founded this nation and what they sacrificed. And even though they understood in principle the truth, they did not always carry it out in deed. Fundamentally, they understood virtues. But sort of like the early American colonists, today's American citizen is subjected to a different kind of tyranny. But whereas the colonists could point to the oppressive taxation and, let's say, a lack of representation in front of the British Crown as the cause of their problems, our society today has difficulty in pointing to the source of our own malaise. I don't know if you know who Bumpy Johnson was. He was in that recent film American Gangster. And he said the system has become so impersonal that it's impossible to find the place to stick the knife into. And so no one knows the farmer who grows their food. No one knows the owner of the retail outlet, their neighborhood, and no one knows who calls the shots at the multinational institutions that has replaced the community bank. And so as a society, what has happened is that the society has evolved in something that is very complex, very difficult in expanding in bureaucracy. And so society's leaders have lost touch with the source of their power, which is the average citizen. You can look at Congress today, and you will realize immediately that they've really lost touch with their boss, which is ultimately we, the people. And as a result of this loss of connection, our leadership has begun to evade accountability for the outcomes of decisions that affect the lives of Americans and our nation's standing as a global citizen. So this, in effect, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, to me, is a new form of tyranny. It is a tyranny of bureaucracy in which systems and models have replaced human tyrants, rendering the average citizen helpless. But also, the sad thing about it is that average citizen is unable to pinpoint those responsible. After all, the trappings of freedom seem to be intact. Everyone can vote, expect to have their vote counted. The judicial system performs at least a ritual of fairness, and the public's exercise of the right of petition for redress of grievance seems to fairly robust. And so, at all the bells and whistles in place, yet rich and poor alike continue to suffer from a source of malaise that is as undeniable as it is elusive. And so, in the age of these sort of impersonal corporations, imperial educational institutions that render sad results for us today, and impenetrable government bureaucracy, where does one turn for answers? And so, more importantly, what I try to do in my book is sort of penetrate how do we as a people continue to strive to live up to what we know is best in ourselves, and how do we evolve into fully competent, resourceful, and responsible human beings. After all, who is watching?
And Armstrong, I can tell you when I read your book, it definitely comes across your distrust of what our government is becoming or has become. And I've said this on the air before, that ever since we got rid of King George, it seems like the government's been slowly winding its way back in the direction of the things that we tried to get rid of with the American Revolution, the idea of individual freedom and individual responsibility. And I got to go to break, but when we come back, I have a few questions for you. All right?
Sure.
All right. All right, I'm here with Armstrong Williams. We're talking about his new book, Reawakening Virtues, Restoring What Makes America Great. And I noticed you called it Restoring What Makes America Great. In other words, you haven't given up on us yet.
Oh, God has not given up on us. Of course not.
And I have to say this now. I'm a little more secular in my core beliefs than you probably are. And in fact, in the book, you make it quite clear that you're born again and that you base a lot of what you are saying on that. But I think that anybody who reads the book would have to agree that you don't just ground your precepts in the Christian religion. In fact, you reference quite heavily in there the Muslim tradition, Islam, Judaism, and other world belief systems as being as equally important.
I have to tell you, this is very interesting what you've just said. I would not consider myself a very religious person. I would consider myself someone who has such reverence for God. And, not only have I read the Guide to Life, which I call the Bible, I don't call it as some religious doctrine. I see it as a guide into the wisdom of life, that if you want to have a peaceful existence that's filled with trials and tribulations and struggles, here's some guidelines that our Creator has set forth for us to follow. I strive, I struggle, I fall short, and I don't always do my best, but I strive to follow those commandments. And I'll tell you why. I found that when I do try to do that which is good, that which is righteous, not what is right, that which is decent, that which is purposeful, that which is honorable, that my life I feel better about my life. I feel good about my life. I become a better person. And especially when I talk about in the chapter, the Sabbath, it's not an advocacy necessarily that you have to walk along with God by going to church. You could be on a jog. You could be scaling a mountain. You could be riding along in your vehicle, but you need some time away from the challenges of the world where you can walk alone to get in touch with yourself, because an unexamined life, just like an unexamined political philosophy, is not worth leading and following. And so while I may not be one to go to church every Sunday, I will send my tithes and pay because I believe in giving the 10%. I just think that church is a building, it's an instrument. I think that people have used religion in many ways to its detriment. Many people have been killed, harmed, raped, and just ripped off by people saying that I believe in God and you should follow me. I don't need an intercessor to get to God. I don't need my minister to take me there. I can read my Bible. I can interpret. Now, I do go to church every blue moon on Sunday for the fellowship and the camaraderie with my brother. Another thing about going to church, we all are equal because we all are sinners. We're there to hear a message that can make us better, to sort of help us further elevate what we've already read and studied. I believe that in order for man to have a society that lasts for civilizations, I think the ultimate goal is that you should want to be good. I want to be good. Being good doesn't mean I have to be in a church with some organized religion. I can work on myself, and then there are others that will come into your life that can help you do that work.
Well, you talk about, and you lay out what I call basically a version of Pascal's challenge, which is the idea that you say, basically, if there's nothing to lose by accepting basic religious values and virtues, and only to gain, so that even if you don't draw from the same source that you do, and I think I'm saying it right, that anybody can benefit from trying to live a virtuous life. I got that basically right?
Oh, no, you're absolutely right. Listen, it is. I have never lost when I've tried to do good, when I've tried to restrict myself in having promiscuous sex, when I've always strived to tell the truth and be honest, when I tried not to deceive and manipulate, when I try to work hard, even though the results are not always what I want them to be, I still work hard because it doesn't always pay off in my time, but it does pay off, and it's better than what you could ever imagine. Another thing I learned about trying to be virtuous and follow virtues, that the best things that happen to you in life, you cannot ever plan. It's a matter that you do the work on the farm, you do the work, and the harvesting is in somebody else's hand, but you've got to do the work.
Right.
So as long as I put in the heavy work, trying to be good, trying to do good, know that I'm going to fall and slip and slide along the way, but as long as my goal is to keep trying to be good, the quality of my life today will be better than what it was yesterday. You're right. It's like Pascal's bet. What do you have to lose? You have everything to gain.
And I also, the other thing I have to say, though, is somebody listening to this might start to think, well, is he trying to preach to me and tell me how to live my life? And I don't think you do that at all. In fact, you lay out what you consider to be important precepts of virtue. But then you go on to qualify it and say, hey, I might not always be perfectly right. And some of these, I think a couple times in the book you refer to the gray areas, like when you talk about the ends justifying the means. And so, for instance, I think you reference using the Underground Railroad or the hiding of Anne Frank, for instance, in Nazi Germany as
in my truth chapter.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. You know, let me say this because I think you continue to raise some very insightful points with the book. The book Reawakening Virtues. I wanted to reawaken my own virtues. I found through this exercise of writing that the hardest work that one has to do is work on themselves. And when you work on yourself, the world eventually around you improves. Now, that is not to say that if you see something where you feel you can make something better, if someone seeks your wisdom and your experience, that you share it with them with the truth, but with compassion, not trying to condemn or hurt them. It's just how you tell it. It's always how you convey the message. So you know what? I can only say to you what works for me. And since this book has been written, the number of people that have written and the letters that we've received, people feel it's their struggle, it's their life, because people don't want to be preached to, but people are looking for something that really has real meaning in their life, Carl. And what that is striving to be good and getting back to those virtues. And it's universal.
And that's what I really liked about the book. As I read more of it, I mean, honestly, as I started reading, I was like, is he just going to, is this another book, self-help book, tell me what to do, or somebody just going to try to impose a particular worldview on me? And I didn't feel that's what your ultimate goal was. I think you were using it as a jumping-off point, and I really liked a lot of the references you brought in. I know, just to give you another example, in one of the chapters you talk about, again, the truth and telling the truth, and a white lie versus just remaining silent, for instance. And you reference what you called some ancient, was it Sufi wisdom?
Yeah.
Is it true? Is it wise? Is it kind? And I thought about that, and I thought, well, Armstrong, you're really good there, because sometimes you want to say something, and you say, well, if I say the truth, I need to stop before I say the truth and go, is it wise for me to speak at this point, or should I hold my tongue? And even if it makes sense to speak, is it going to be kind, and is it necessary? I really thought that was a great point.
And you touched on something else that I do appreciate your reading the book. You see, awakening virtues, and I need to say this, helps sort of clear through the fog and directs the reader to the source of today's challenging social and economic realities. I mean, in challenging, called the prevailing wisdom, it clearly identifies, and this is what you're talking about, points of departure from the values that have stood as beacons of American progress. And further, awakening virtues offer the average American a way back to safe harbor through a return to traditional values. The things that I talked about in the beginning: faith, thrift, work, social justice, personal accountability, and enlightened compassion. And unlike any other book that I believe currently being marketed today, Awakening Virtues attacks the problem from two different levels at once. And let me explain what that is. On the one hand, it points to social challenges from the standpoint of culture, religion, politics, and family. But on the other hand, it starts with the source of society, the internal makeup of the individual. Socratic dialogue forms the basics of a winning argument for a return to virtue that transcends generational, class, and political stratification and unites Americans behind a common cause, which is reawakening the sense of virtue in individuals and institutions that has made our society a great nation.
And I know that you spend some time, and I'm going to, in the second half hour, I'm going to want to talk to you a little bit more about how this applies to, just what's going on right now in the world. But you spend some time talking about and defending the capitalistic model, and I really enjoyed how you kind of referred to communism as, in and of itself, on its face, a great idea. Give from each as they're able, to each as to their need. But then you point out that it just falls flat once you apply the human equation to it. And then you go back to talk more about capitalism and how it's traditionally worked well for us and why it probably will continue to work well for us in the future.
Because our Creator, and this is from the book, on the Virtue of Capitalism chapter, has deemed that we're not all endowed with equal talent and the ability to succeed. We have always coexisted in societies of haves and have-nots, and with few exceptions, the poor could not escape the class into which they were born. I mean, they were sort of comforted only by their religions that assured them they would be rewarded in heaven. I think that's very interesting because when you look at the major economic systems of the world, the socialism, the communism, and the capitalism, you have to look to the values and virtues of the people that live and work with them, benefit by them, and reinforce them. Communism and socialism is basically dead, and capitalism, with all of its flaws, is still the remaining beacon of them all. I mean, and when it comes to the individuals, it is not new to say that all people are not created equal. I mean, if you think about it from the dawn of humanity, there have been those who have had advantages over others. And, I mean, you just look at the different challenges people are born with mentally and physically and the gifts that some people have that others don't have. I mean, even if you go back to Constantine's installation of Christianity as the state religion, the Catholic Church in its Western Roman and Eastern Orthodox form dominated the civilized world far more than a millennium.
Right.
So you have to go back and look at history. You cannot just look at these concepts just in the context of us being Americans today a little over 200 years ago. Oh, you have to look at from the beginning of history because there is nothing new under the sun. These concepts have been tried and tested, and they failed.
It's funny you say that. You say there's nothing new under the sun, and that's probably something that I sometimes think is a great intellectual sin by a lot of really smart people, which is not to spend enough time studying history and not enough time to look back and see what thinkers in the past have thought, but more importantly, what they've observed about the realities of their time and place and all the different variations of government that have risen and fallen. I think that's a great point.
Yes, and that's what I try to do. Obviously, you can tell I try to do a lot of reading. Even when you talk about the Protestant Reformation made the individual the arbiter of his own scriptural interpretations. And as a result of that, the power of the Catholic Church waned as the priests and institutions of the church were no longer needed to illuminate the Bible. And what did they do? It paved the way for capitalism. And
interestingly, just a side note, the Catholic Church caught up with that concept in Vatican II in the 60s when they went to the vernacular and turned the priest around.
Yes.
We got to go to our next break, Armstrong. Can you hold with me?
Of course.
All right. Hey, welcome back. Carl Rominger here. I'm joined by Armstrong Williams, conservative commentator and author of a new book. Armstrong, if someone wanted to find out a little bit more about your book or purchase it, what should they do?
Amazon.com.
Okay, that's where I got mine.
It is on Amazon.com. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, well, I like to remind people, and I also would tell them to go to your website, rightsidewire.com, and I posted it on my Facebook page for anybody who needs help finding it. Or you can just look you up on Facebook as well, I assume.
Yes, we're on Facebook and Twitter.
Armstrong, we were talking a little bit about the book, and we touched on some things. And what I like about the book also, because it's obviously just out here in July, you had time to work in a little bit of current events.
Yes, that's true. Listen, Carl, very insightful. The book was finished. Things were unfolding in the Middle East, Egypt, and all around. And I wanted to go back in the book. And then the economy was tanking. It's very interesting. When the book was completed, the virtue of savings, the virtue of capitalism was not part of it.
Okay.
And I went back and I finished those chapters in one day.
Well, I'll tell you what, though. I really liked, and you said in there, you made reference to the fact that the governors are being more honest than the federal politicians right now, and I love that comment.
Well, they have to be, because they are the CEOs of their states, and they see the reality of it, especially when you deal with the unions, the loss of jobs. They know that money from the stimulus package that Obama said would create jobs, it went to deal with the shortfalls of state budgets. That's why Governor Mark Sanford in South Carolina fought not to take the stimulus money, and he was vilified, but he was celebrated in the end because he was right, because he had vision. Yes, of course.
And I know and it doesn't, and there's Republican and Democratic governors right now who are speaking the truth, so to speak, to their states. Cuomo comes to mind as a Democrat. Corbett comes to mind as a Republican in this state, who've said, hey, we just don't have the money we had and we got to do something about it.
You know what? No, not many people really want to embrace the truth about where we are financially. I don't know whether they feel it's too painful. I don't know whether there are those who think that Americans cannot handle the truth. But at some point, you have to face the reality. I'm not going to go as far to say that the country is bankrupt, but I will tell you this. It is definitely the 800-pound gorilla in the room when you think about the pigs, Greece, and those places. You see, the American people are just plain tired of the lies at this point, Carl, just to be candid.
Yeah.
No amount of Fed goosing the economy is going to bring back the consumer without more jobs. It's time to realize that the overall economy has decoupled from the stock market despite what companies look like. I mean, this country is really in trouble. No government will ever solve these problems. I mean, government cannot create jobs, and government cannot become the corporate leader of an economy. It just cannot. The government is trying to take on so many roles that it cannot handle. And then the other issues that we don't even talk about, and this is I didn't even touch upon this in my book. I mean, even the president has decided to issue a policy decree that will enable at least 300,000 illegal aliens to secure employment authorization in the United States, as millions of American citizens, especially minorities who are hardest hit by this downturn in the economy, are unemployed and losing their homes to foreclosure. It's beyond insanity, but it's what you do when you want to pursue a certain voting bloc. You do things that are insane.
And of course, that's kind of one of the arguments that the rising difficulty of a representative democracy is that each representative is playing to a certain audience, and they forget about the entire audience because it's just their own constituency, or at least, 50? What do you need, 51% of your own constituency?
Yeah.
And it's almost like the tragedy of the commons, Everybody's doing what they think is in their best interest, but it seems to be trashing the national interest. And it's to me how you end up with 400 really smart people in Congress, right? Or plus 400 some plus, but yet collectively they can't do anything right.
Yeah, well, listen, you say it better than I do. I mean, all you have to do is look at the history, the track record.
The other thing that I wanted to touch on with you was some things that I thought were pretty fair. I would say not surprising, but I just thought you're very fair-minded. For instance, some of our right-wing listeners. I'm going to make fun of. I always like making fun of some of my listeners, and they know I just joshing them. But you, for instance, say you don't have a problem with, for instance, an international code on human rights. A little bit of international law, for instance. I know for some of the listeners, they would think that's the worst thing in the history of the world, to acknowledge that there might be something beyond the immediate sovereign of the United States. I thought that was a pretty fair position.
The only thing I can say is this. Since 1987, I've gone overseas every year for at least a month at a time. I have gotten to see and experience the horrific situations of how people live. And I know how our code of ethics and our sense of morality, we definitely cannot march to the front of some other nation. But there's got to be certain standards, because there are certain things that all people believe, no matter what our backgrounds and what our culture may be. There's just some laws that we all embrace. And human rights, whether it comes to trafficking little kids, for sex trafficking around the world, I mean, that's just one of the issues. I just think it's something, particularly given my worldly travels, that's something that needs to be addressed.
And I appreciate that. I also liked the fact that you spoke about the Constitution, and I thought franker terms than a lot of pundits will. You call it something that can evolve a little bit or change with. I think you talk about the evolution, for instance, of the Constitution as it applies to minorities and women.
But listen. Now I will tell you this. Boy, that is when you deal with minorities in this country, it's just That's a very difficult issue, and I'll tell you why. You know, I think that our founding fathers were geniuses. I think the Constitution that we have in place, which has sustained itself for generations and generations, is an incredible document. And I believe that when it says that we all have the same inalienable rights, we're all are created equal, I just think that, you know, when you look at members of the Supreme Court, you look at Justice Thomas and Roberts, who are strict constitutionalists, and then you have those that believe that the document can be changed and be adapted to where we are today. I agonize over this, but obviously when I wrote about this, I did say it was, and it still is an evolving document. I stick with that.
Well, and I'll tell you why I believe that you have to have some flexibility in it, or it's inherently there. And when I talked to a guy named Bob Durgan, who's a regular week show here on WHP, Bob's kind of a strict constructionist. And as I like to point out to him, the problem is, okay, let's take the Fourth Amendment. It says, you know, you're free from unreasonable searches and seizures, but the founders never defined unreasonable. And
nor could they have considered the times we're in today.
And right, and so you know, the courts, I think, wisely have said that word unreasonable gets balanced between society's interests and the individual's right of privacy, but that we recognize the individual has a right of privacy. I think that's the fundamental upshot of the Fourth Amendment. But that you still have to, what that balance means in any given time or place is going to change over time. And I don't think that's a bad thing. On other things, though, I mean, the courts are a little more certain. You know, there's some more absolutes in the Constitution than the Fourth Amendment. But I just always quarrel sometimes with people who think that you have to, you know, it's written a certain way, therefore it means a certain thing.
Oh, no, I don't agree. I agree with you. You and I are on the same page.
What else? You know, I guess, would you be willing to take some callers here in the next 15 minutes?
Of course.
Let me give out the call. It's 540-0580. If you're out there listening and you want to jump on and ask Armstrong a question, 540-0580. And if we get some callers in the next segment, we'll throw them on here. I do usually get some callers for the show here, Armstrong, so I'm not I usually answer their legal questions, and I am going to ask you when we come back after break here a little bit about your feelings on the court system as it stands today. We're going to go to break, and I'll be right back. 540-0580, talking to Armstrong Williams. Hey, welcome back. Carl Rominger here. Taking a break from answering your legal questions. I've got Armstrong Williams with me, and I know we got a caller up on the board here, Armstrong, but we had somebody call in during the break who didn't want to stay on, but said they wanted to know your views on nutrition. And I know you have actually a whole chapter in the book about the idea of taking care of your body and personal responsibility as it comes to health.
Well, you know what? I just think that Americans have to be very careful about supplements. I think that we have the perfect body that was created. We just don't do we do imperfect things in caring for our bodies. I think we've grown so addicted on these supplements and these painkillers that it destroys the body's natural biology. I think the best thing for the body when you talk about nutrition, I do talk about the physiology of success in my book. You know, I go to the gym 4 times a week, an hour and a half. I run. I'll only eat the oatmeal and cereal for breakfast and a light lunch, and I don't eat in the evening. I think we've become so consumed with food that we feel we cannot exist without it. I think when one of our loved ones or someone we read about go through the autopsy and they say they died of natural causes, basically what it says to me is that people died of food. I mean, I think that you get caught up in these glamour ads about nutrition and supplements, and you can have this surgery to take out this fat, and people don't want to do the heavy lifting. They don't want to do the hard work. I mean, it is not easy getting up 4 o'clock in the morning and being in the gym at 4:30. It's not easy running 5 miles 3 times a week. It's not easy pushing away from the dessert menu. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of sacrifice. If people were to take better care of their bodies, better care of their health, if they were to eat properly and stay away from the drugs, the cigarettes, and the things that are not good for you, the health care costs in this country would reduce drastically. The hospitals would be an entirely different place. And we just don't do enough preventive medicine. We don't do enough in caring for ourselves, and we surrender it and give it to someone else. And what they do is they exploit us. It has become an industry, and the industry is that we're too lazy, not sophisticated enough, and not understanding enough that you don't need a membership in a gym or workout facility to work out. You can do certain exercise like jumping jacks. You can do stretches. You can run You can run back and forth, up and down for 15 minutes. There's so many things that you can do at home. You don't need these glamorous places to do it, and you can go outside and run. I just basically walk 5 or 7 minutes every day if you don't feel you're in the best health. So if you realize why America's health is in crisis, why there's so much obesity, because people are lazy and don't want to do the heavy lifting.
I'm 100% with you on that one, and I too go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week, and I think it's one of the greatest things I do. John, you're on the air with Armstrong Williams and Carl Rominger.
Hi, Carl. Hi, Armstrong. You know, I was just wondering if, for the loose interpretation of the Constitution, how he feels whether it's any of the government's business, whether what kind of shape that I'm in, what kind of food did I eat.
Now, let me ask, did I mention the government once? I said we, the government. To me, I think we've totally lost the role of what the federal government is. It's not the government's role to provide health care and insurance and to protect us from bankruptcy when we become too big to fail. I mean, when my company first faces challenges and difficulties, the government doesn't come in and bail me out. That is not the government role. If a person wants to be fat, if a person doesn't want to work out, if they want to be unhealthy, that's their choice. But the problem is that it places such a burden on hospitals and the healthcare system in this country.
And
well, I agree with you there. That what I was asking, though, is that insofar as we have a national health care plan in effect at the moment, it then becomes the business of the government to tell you and me how it is that we might take care of our own bodies.
It's not the role of the government.
And I don't think that's the role of government.
So you guys, John, you agree with Armstrong. There's no doubt about it. And actually, I had the benefit of reading the book, so I already know that in the book, for instance, he mentions the fact that the Obamas have made nutrition and childhood obesity an important part of Michelle Obama's outreach. And I think you point out in the book, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, the fact that it is a national crisis alone is the real issue.
Well, listen, I don't have a problem with the First Lady encouraging people to be healthy, as long as you're not trying to use government programs and money to support what you're trying to do. If you're just out on a campaign saying don't smoke, minimize what you drink, don't drink and drive, watch what you eat, don't allow your kids to get fat, make sure you discipline your kids, as long as you're doing that through a message, I don't have a problem with that. Well, but the government should play no role in terms of putting dollars and programs in place.
Well, John, I think Armstrong's on your side 100% on that one. Bob, you're on with Armstrong Williams and Carl Rominger.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. One of the things I think that we've lost as a country is the concept of taking care of people at the lowest possible level. It used to be called subsidiarity. And it means that if your neighbor's barn burns down, you help fix that. If there's something wrong in your development or your community, you're going to chip in and do it. And we've got, where the government is doing everything from a tops down, we need to do things from the bottom up. We need to have a relationship with our neighbors, with our people in our community, and we need to do it. We've lost that. That's why when I walk through my neighborhood, I don't see anybody. I don't know neighbors. There's 4 doors down, there's a person that I've never talked to in 20 years.
Well, and I'll give you an example. Look at the modern porch. These days, if you go into a typical development, there isn't a porch. In fact, people work hard to make sure that when they are outside on their patio, it's completely surrounded so they don't have to see their neighbors.
You know what? 2 weeks ago, I do door-to-door evangelization, and I went into Harrisburg, into the city, to do it, and a woman there wanted a male to go with her, and we did it during the daylight. But there were all people on the porches. You know what happened? When we walked by, they greeted us in the middle of the city. Whereas when I do it in the suburbs, people don't want to talk to me. They go, I'm sorry, don't have time. The people on the porches, what you're saying, they were reaching out to us as we would approach.
There are studies, actually, that show that just having porches in front of houses greatly increases the percentage of the people in the neighborhood who know their neighbors. And it seems like common sense, but it's an important structural portion of a house. Bob, I got to let you go because I only have a few minutes left with Armstrong. Armstrong, we only got a few minutes left in this hour. You're welcome to hang longer, but I know you got stuff to do. So.
Right. Face of the storm. But I've enjoyed this hour. It's so rare I talk other than my own show, an interview for an hour, but this has been so heartwarming. And, we do need to be more neighborly. We need to be more community-oriented. We need to do more and being role models and providing opportunities for people in our communities, checking on them to make sure they're okay. If someone's loved one has died, making sure you're not there just at the time of bereavement, but afterwards, if someone is old and gray, living alone, check on them as if it's your grandmother or your own mother. But people have become so distrustful because of what they see in the media, what they read in the papers. They just assume that no one is really worthy of trust anymore, so they just don't bother.
Right, and then you're afraid too because if you're checking in on the elderly neighbor, then somebody else is going to say, "Oh, he's over there trying to get himself written in the will." Or, listen, Armstrong, Before we run out of time here, I want to remind people that they can go to Amazon.com and find your book, Reawakening Virtues. If they've heard the interview today and they want to know more about the book, they should just buy it. It's not an expensive book, and I'm a pretty critical reader, and I thought it was good. So,
and also we will be on C-SPAN 2 book notes on Labor Day at 5:30 p.m.
Oh, excellent!
Eastern Standard Time, Labor Day.
Excellent. And
man, thank you so much for taking the time because it's your most valuable asset. There's so many other things that you could talk about during this hour, but you chose to invite me to come on. I'm just so honored by it, and I thank you very much.
Well, and again, I read the book. I thought it was interesting, and I knew how to get a hold of you, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to reach out and see if he'd be willing to come on. And I know you were kind enough to give us your time because you work pretty hard as it is. You've got a show on the radio most of the week, and I know you got everything else going on. So I'm taking up your Saturday. And
we're on Sinclair Broadcast Network stations, and you can check their local listings. We're in 82 network television markets all over the country, and we're on Sirius 128 every night at 7 p.m. And then I do a daily blog for thehill.com, and I write once a week for the Washington Times, and then I have a syndicated column. And then we have our own wire, rightsidewire.com. But you know what? I would never say I'm too busy. I thank God that I do well managing my time, and I don't allow my time and others to manage me. And, if there's something I really want to do, I would never make an excuse that I don't have time, I'm too busy. There are 24 hours in a day, and I got to tell you something, I spend about 9 of them sleeping.
Well, you know what, and that's actually not a bad thing either. If you have a sleep requirement, you need to meet it, and that's another thing that Americans haven't been doing for a couple decades now, and I think you touch on that in the book as well.
Yeah, well, look, I would never, ever say to people, I can get back to you because I was too busy. I refuse to buy that excuse. I am never too busy to get back to people. I would never use that. But, when people acknowledge you and they go out and read your book and listen to you on the radio, knowing that there's so many other things that they can choose to listen to, I'm just humble and grateful by that. You should never get to the point where you forget from the bridge that brought you across to the success that you're having today. And it's the power of the people.
Thanks, Armstrong. Armstrong Williams, Reawakening Virtues. Go to Amazon.com or look him up on the internet, Right Side Wire. I'll be back next hour to answer your legal questions here live on the air. Again, thanks, Armstrong.
Thank you, Carl.